When our conversations around issues to do with the environment, governance, and of course, social issues are now very urgent for not only the investors, but also for the end users, and not forgetting organizations as well. So this morning, we're going to be having a conversation that you've probably come across in one way or the other, as a business person, as an individual, or even you as an end user. We'll be hearing a lot the ESG, and that is environmental, social, and governance. And it is increasingly seen in requirements for companies to demonstrate their business models as sustainable. And later throughout this conversation, we'll try to understand what sustainable really means in this aspect when it comes to businesses, and also conversations around how to do with the people we work with, for example. As a company out there, you may land on this very conversation and you may ask yourself, why should I be interested in this conversation? Why should I spend 30 or 45 minutes listening to this conversation on ESG and customs and trade? As a trader, an importer, an exporter, sooner or later when you're crossing borders, you actually encounter different laws and regulations in different countries. So today, we'll be diving into that conversation, and we'll try as much as possible to understand what it really means as a business model for different companies, but also to understand in terms of health of a company, how far can it go? Does it have to be on a quarterly manner or even on a yearly manner? So this morning, it is a timely conversation, also because as a country here in Uganda, we continuously see different environmental issues that not only affect us as individuals, but go on a wider scale to affect companies and how much they attract within these companies, especially when they're trying to attract investors. So I'm very honored to be hosting this conversation. My name is Sandra Twinovidio. I am a news anchor with NTV Uganda. I'm also a show host of Eco Africa. Now, how it plays into this conversation is that on a daily, when I'm shooting this episode or every episode of Eco Africa, we talk about environmental issues and how they affect different decisions of different companies when they're trying to make investment decisions. So it is a timely conversation. So if you land on this, do not run away. Do not, click next. Please do stay on that very page so that you too can learn one or two things that I'm also eagerly waiting to actually learn. So just to quickly take us through the program today, I want us to, of course, understand that the core value of this conversation, panel discussion by KPMG, is to understand the interlinkage between customs and trade and also ESG. So we'll be having opening remarks and we'll be getting insights on ESG. Later, I'll be introducing the gentleman that will be taking us through that. We'll also be looking at insights on customs and trade. I mean, what does it mean? Every time you are doing something somewhere, you're going to see customs and trade. So what does it really mean for all of us, today? And later we'll get the understanding of the interlinkage between customs and trade and also ESG. And we'll head on to the session that I love most, that is the question and answer. And this will be to our panel speakers. They'll be taking us through a number of things that we'll be looking forward to in regards to the presentations. So do allow me now to invite Mr. Edgar Isingoma, but before I do that, I think it's very paramount for me to take us through all the panel speakers here today. And when I was looking at all your profiles, I was looking for one who has worked for probably 2 years, 3 years. All our panel speakers have the experience over 5-7 years. So you can be sure that you're going to get the right information. So do allow me to introduce Edgar Isingoma. He is a partner at KPMG Uganda with over 26 years of work experience, 16 of which have been in financial physical management engagements in East Africa. Edgar is the head International Development Advisory Services. He is a member of Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, and he also holds a master's in business administration and accounting. He is also the fellow of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, member of the Institute of Certified Public Accounts. So what more can I say, Mr. Edgar? I think I can stop there.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you for being here with us today. So that is Mr. Edgar, and he will be speaking to us briefly in a bit after we introduce all our panel speakers, and he will set the pace of today's conversation, that is ESG and customs and trade. We also have Mr. Peter Chambade. Now, Peter is a tax partner at KPMG. Peter heads the Tax and Regulatory Services Business Unit in KPMG Uganda. He has over 21 years of experience providing tax and regulatory services to clients in both the public and the private sectors in East Africa and also other areas across the world. Peter is a qualified accountant, a fellow of the Association of Chartered Certified Accounts and a member of the Institute of Certified Public Accounts of Uganda. Many thanks for joining us, Peter. We're happy to have you on this panel. 21 years of experience. Now, we'll also now move on to a gentleman that I think is slowly becoming my favorite, not to piss off the other panel speakers, Mr. Stephen Inegat. Stephen is a partner and also country leader at KPMG Uganda. Stephen is a qualified accountant, also a member of ICPAU, and holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree of Makerere University here in Kampala. He holds a master's degree in the UK. He also has an in-depth knowledge and extensive experience of audits, accounting, and special assignments for a wide range of corporate, parastatal, bank, and insurance industry, pension funds, clients. This is your man. Thank you so much for joining us, Stephen. I am looking forward to introducing the ladies, but do allow me to move on to Edgar Mukasa. Mr. Edgar is an associate director at KPMG Uganda with over 11 years tax advisory experience. Edgar is a qualified accountant and holds a Bachelor's of Business Administration and Management. He also holds a diploma in computer science and business studies. He has worked on multiple tax and regulatory projects across the East African region and on the international scene as well. Edgar has handled a number of very important clients in the consumer industry in Uganda. In 2015, Edgar was seconded to Russia as a tax manager, in which he obtained expertise in the areas of transfer, pricing, taxation of different industries operating in the Russian economy. So we'll probably be asking you why they attacked the other country.
Thank you.
We are happy to have you on the panel this morning. Now we'll move on to Mark Tusime. Many thanks for joining us. Mark is a manager at KPMG Uganda and has over 8 years of experience in tax compliance and tax advisory services. Mark has also carved out a niche in advising companies in respect to tax compliance and tax advisory, such as tax health checks, transfer pricing, tax due diligence, tax reconciliations, among others. Now, Mark has conducted and overseen numerous tax compliance and tax advisory assignments for not-for-profit consulting, engineering, construction, financial services, insurance, and oil and gas sectors. He holds a Bachelor's of Science in Land Economics here at Makerere University and an advanced diploma in international taxation. Mark is an affiliate member of the Chartered Institute of Taxation, that is in the UK. Many thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thank you, Sandra.
Now to the ladies, you've not been forgotten. Shifra Sunday is a senior advisor for Customs, Excise and Trade at KPMG Uganda and the lead of the Ugandan office. With over 7 years experience, she executes and leads various roles relating to advisory, trading, research and project execution. Shifra is a PhD student currently with Charles Sturt University, that is in Australia, and is currently conducting her research in customs and trade. So we'll probably be asking you how it is looking for the Ugandan audience, especially because I believe this is the target audience before we move on to the other people. Now, among other qualifications, she has a master's degree in customs administration from Moi University, that is through the Kenyan School of Revenue Administration. She also has a customs practicing certificate from the Uganda Revenue Authority. So to our audience, is there anything else that you would need from us, really? All these people will be giving us the ins and outs of the ESG and also customs and trade. So make sure you do not move an inch. Move on now to Esther Achieng. Esther is a certified accountant and currently a manager in KPMG Uganda. She has over 10 years experience providing tax advice to different clients, both here and international. With this experience, she has amassed a wealth of knowledge in the tax policies and also tax compliance implementation. She also has international tax practice in KPMG in the US. So UK, US, Australia, great panel. Lucy Kemjisha. Lucy is an advocate of the High Court of Uganda, a member of the Uganda Law Society and East African Law Society. Lucy is currently an assistant manager, tax and regulatory services with KPMG in Uganda. She was also called to the bar in 2018, and since 2014, she has assisted clients to meet their tax, corporate, and other legal needs. Thank you for being here, Lucy.
Thank you, Sandra.
Now, we'll move on now finally to our very last panelist, that is Charles Mwanguzi, he is an advocate of the High Court of Uganda. He is currently a manager, tax and regulatory services with KPMG here in Uganda. He is also a chartered governance professional accredited by the Chartered Governance Institute, that is in the UK. So, ladies and gentlemen, here is our great panel of speakers. And we'll be diving into this conversation right away. Just to set the pace of this conversation, like I mentioned earlier, right now, it's not just about being sustainable. It means really living in a friendly, environmentally friendly environment, if I should repeat it and emphasize it that way. Now, what ESG really means is that you ensure your business model can adapt to what is expected to be very different in the coming years. For your investors to say in the longer term, can I actually trust this company to push forward my goals and objectives, that will still cater for the interests of the environment, for the people we work with, and also for how you really relate. So, ladies and gentlemen, do allow me invite Mr. Edgar Isingoma to set the pace of this conversation and to allow us understand what ESG really means and why it is important for us to have this conversation today. Over to you, Mr. Edgar. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Sandra, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you have rightly said, ESG is defining everything we do in life. When you look globally now, why is ESG coming as something so important right now or in the last 10 years? It's because climate issues have become at the forefront. Global warming is something which is not sustainable. The world is warming at a pace which we cannot be able to remain sustainable. And there are many other issues which are affecting the world. When you look at the fires in the US, you look at the fires in Europe, you look at the camp to Uganda, you look at the floods in Kasese, you look at right now the high temperatures which are hitting everywhere in the country. Definitely, it means that climate change is something which is so huge. When you look globally in terms of the social aspects, matters of Black Lives Matter, matters of gender inclusion, matters of diversity, where people are really getting impacted by race, by color, by what they believe in, matters of LGBTQ, which have become at the forefront up to the point of dividing churches right now as we talk in the world. When we talk about governance matters, how are we including gender? How are we doing our business in the world? So all these matter a lot to us. And when you look globally, the UN has been driving this agenda on ESG through what we call the Conference of Parties. COP27 happened in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, November. COP28 will be happening in Dubai in November, December. And all this is to try to bring the agenda of ESG at the forefront, because we cannot sustain the world the way it is. ESG is everything we do. ESG is about sustainability. How are you doing your business? How is it incorporating the environment, the social and governance issues for you to remain sustainable? It's no longer about actually doing things so that the public can perceive you to be doing right things. It is the right thing to do for us to make sure that the environment we are working on is impacted by our activities positively. And for the businesses, everything we do impacts the environment. We source our materials for the environment. We source our labor from the environment. We supply the environment. We impact the health of our people and all that. So it is ESG something which is central in terms of doing our business in everywhere we do. As KPMG, we did our survey last year, and we are asking the executives how they feel, how they see in the environment and all that. And you can see from the study, environmental aspects are coming at the forefront of our every top executive in East Africa. 76% of them are saying it is something which is so important for us to be able to look at. But ESG has a lot of advantages. It has a lot of advantages that when you take into consideration all these aspects, everyone needs to look at it positively. For instance, ESG can help us to source very, very low-cost financing for our businesses, because when they see you are treating the environment in the best way, you are doing responsible investing, you can be able to source financing at a lower cost. It also comes with decreased costs of operations for the organization, because you are doing sustainable sourcing, you are doing financial arrangements which are low cost, and of course it improves investor confidence. For investors are always confident about organizations which are environmentally friendly, which have social factors, which are taking the social aspect into consideration. We look at IFC now, it's taking all these aspects when they are trying to invest in any institution. But also it improves your reputation as an organization, and you can be able to attract labor. And right now, when you look about the young, the people now who are agile, as much as possible, they want to work with organizations that create impact, that can be able to show that they are doing something right. And finally, for me, it can be a competitive differentiator for all of us. Thank you, Sandra.
Much for those opening remarks that I believe have helped us again understand that the main conversation here is to understand how ESG can influence investment decisions and actually attract more people to you, because you're providing an environment that caters for the environment and also that caters for the general space that people operate in. And actually the other thing that I hoped you would point out was the issue of forced labor. We are seeing it also happen on the Ugandan scene, which I believe has attracted a lot of public debate on our continent, you know. So would you say this in a way falls into ESG as well when we talk about social issues as well?
Sandra, that is perfect, and it is true. Forced labor, call it slave trade, which was abolished so many years ago. It's something which is social. You don't want people to be able to work against their will. They should be able to work when they have decided on their own that that's the environment they want to be able to work on. They can have capacity to negotiate the circumstances, the environment in which they are going to be able to work in. They can be able to enter contracts and be able to say, really, I'll be paid this and all that. So forced labor definitely is something which you really have to look at. For example, in the labor aspects, if you look at Kamwenje Road, which was financed by the World Bank 3 years ago, because of the behaviors of the contractor, which was forcing labor and also taking advantage of young girls and all that, the contract was cancelled. It could not go ahead until those issues were settled and we got a new contractor. Those are the aspects we're talking about. The social issues are so central in terms of ESG. When George Floyd was killed in the US by the police, you saw the uprising. It became a world issue. Everybody looking at that. Why? Is it because he's black? Of recent, many people are also getting that, but you can see how people are coming out. Go back to Martin Luther Jr. All that were issues to do with social issues, which are now coming at the forefront. Last night I was listening to CNN, and I was looking at Christian Amanpour talking about the war in Ukraine and interviewing the two ladies. Gender is becoming so important. You must put the women at the forefront because it is the right thing to do. They bring different perspective to the table, which enhances all of us in terms of doing our business better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edgar, for that. Now, we want to understand what customs and trade is. For the exporters and importers, you've probably interacted with this. For the common person out there, you may know it as probably regulations of how goods move from one place to another. But what does it really mean for a business person, for an investor, or even for you who's looking to join that industry? So, Mr. Stephen Inaget, give us some insights on customs and trade and why it is important for us to be better informed on it.
Thank you, Sandra. Customs and trade. It is by choice. Customs is a facilitator of trade. Now, let me break it down. What do they do? So the starting point is this is a facilitator of global trade. Look at it this way, that goods that come into the country or get out of the country go through their hands. So when you talk of customs, you're looking at guidelines, you're looking at procedures, processes which have been put in place to facilitate, to ensure that goods move freely and easily between borders. So that's very important. It's not regulating goods moving in country, it's crossing the border. So meaning into the country and out of the country. So why is it that it's a big part of government? One, you're looking at the territorial integrity of a country. So you do not want businesses which may harm you just to be coming into your market without anyone checking and monitoring them. So they are at the door trying to check who is coming in. I'm talking about trade. Who is coming in and who is getting out, using guidelines which have been developed. Now, those guidelines, I will speak to them shortly, but what's the key is their work is to facilitate trade. Now, as a common person, look at it this way. As they facilitate trade, they also ensure that they safeguard whatever comes into the country meets the local requirements and international requirements as well. So this will speak to the safety of goods coming in. Do they meet our standards? This will eliminate, you've heard of fake goods and all of these things coming in, which can be dangerous to human. So customs then becomes critical because they have guidelines which they use to stop certain goods from entering the country. All those that don't meet standards, you have had our maize probably being sent back from Kenya for not meeting certain standards. Again, customs comes in handy in helping you. So what's the key as a business person is to know that customs is there to facilitate your trade. So they are very friendly in providing information which will allow you to import or to export goods. It's also important to know that the rules they use, one, some of them are locally enacted through our parliament, but a majority of them are global accepted rules, which are coming from the customs, Global Customs Organization, and widely adopted by organizations like World Trade Organization. And this is what they use to facilitate international trade across the world. And Uganda being part of that body, you find that this customs unit is critical in playing into that space. Sandra.
Much for that on the insights of customs and trade. So for a person who's probably saying, in simple terms, should I say customs and trade is just a facilitator?
Well, I think the key word is to facilitate. I'm shying away from using the word regulating, because all they do is to say, here is a checklist of what you need to do. When you're playing in the game of trade, follow the following guidelines. These are the tax implications. These are the health implications. These are the requirements of the local market or international market. Please follow this. So in effect, they are providing a lot of information to you to allow you to take advantage of international trade. So that's why I'm using the word facilitating as opposed to saying they regulate. But there are key things like they monitor, they enable, they provide guidance on how to penetrate certain markets. They have a big and wider range that they give. And of course, the expertise in terms of helping you know your tax obligations related to international trade.
Would you say that what Customs and Trade does actually facilitates ESG?
Absolutely. Like Edgar explained, ESG is everything today. Now, look at it this way. The trade cannot operate in a vacuum. There is an environment in which it happens. So when you're talking about the social issues, you're dealing with human beings, men and women. When you talked about forced labor, these are people who are producing, who are in factories, who are working. So it's all about that social aspect. It's about governance. We talked about rules, guidelines used by the customs unit or union or department. That is part of governance. Being accountable, being transparent, being open and saying this is how trade is done in Uganda, between Uganda and Kenya. So yes, absolutely, it's part and parcel of ESG.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. So I want to bounce this question now to Mr. Peter Chambade. We've had the backdrop of what ESG really means and also what customs and trade is. And now we want you to box it up for us, the interlinkage between the two.
Thank you very much, Sandra. As has been indicated by Edgar and Steve, ESG is critical in everything that we do today. And if you look at all stakeholders, all the stakeholders now are increasingly focusing on ESG. When I talk of stakeholders, we are looking at investors, we are looking at regulators, we are looking at customers, we are looking at employees, we are looking at suppliers. So if you are dealing in trade, then your company, because if you are going to deal in trade, you are either a person who is an individual or a company. And it is important for us to know the importance of ESG, because currently it is believed that companies that embrace ESG and are doing the right thing from an ESG perspective, that is from an environmental, social, and governance perspective, they are better trusted, they are less risky, they are more compliant, and as such, they are the ones to deal with. So, how do I link customs and trade to ESG? If I'm going to trade, then I must embrace ESG for me to be able to actually thrive in my business. To the extent that I do not embrace proper ESG principles, then probably I'm going to have a problem with a regulator, because there are certain regulations that are expected to be complied with from a customs perspective. There are tariffs that I need to be aware of. There are things I should not deal in. And if I deal in them, then I have trouble with the customs officers. Or if I'm found to be not compliant, then probably I'll not be able to trade with certain people who are actually looking more at ensuring that we are dealing with people that embrace the right principles. So if I'm going to have a sustainable business, then I need to embrace ESG. And we are seeing this in practical terms. For example, if you look at customs regulations, we have regimes, tax regimes, which prohibit importation of, let's say, certain hazardous goods. And if I'm going to trade, then I need to be aware about these specific laws and regulations. That if I'm going to deal in this particular item, then if it's prohibited, I'll be out of the law. Or if I decide to deal in it, and it is believed to be detrimental to the lives, let's say, of people, like, let's say, tobacco, then I should be ready to pay the duties that go with it, which in many instances are way beyond the normal duty. If the normal import duty is maybe 20 or 30% or 35% now, then you may have to pay 100% or more. So as you trade, then you need to be aware of that. If you look at cars, if I'm going to bring in a new car, I will not pay environmental tax because it is less hazardous to the environment. If I'm going to bring a car older than 5 years, then I should be ready to pay the duty that it goes with. So anyone dealing with trade needs to be aware of the customs laws and regulations in that respect, and then they need also to embrace those environmental, social, and governance principles to ensure that their businesses are sustainable. And also, it requires to be compliant, because with compliance, then you have a better understanding of what is expected of you, and as such, people believe in your business better. So putting in place systems that will comply with the laws and regulations, which is part of the governance aspect of ESG, then makes your business more sustainable, and thus it would thrive better.
Thank you so much. I think you brought out a very key point, especially when you gave us a real-life example of buying a car. And I think Ugandans can relate better with that. However, for me, when you say, if you bring in an older car and then you're paying environmental tax, and you still bring it in, even if it's a lot of tax, doesn't it still, affect the environment?
Okay, it definitely, Sandra, still affects the environment. But I think one of the things also the regulators or government is looking at is balancing the level of development where we are. For example, if they decided that only new cars are going to be brought in, and you look at the need of transportation, then we'll have very, very few people being able to afford a car. So I think that's why they are phasing it. If you look at the regulations, they have been phasing. They bring in environmental tax, then they bring in also bans. And they say now cars beyond 8 years, you cannot bring them in. And I believe we'll go on like that eventually. The developed countries, some countries, you drive a car for 10 years. After 10 years, you must destroy it. They cannot allow it on the road. But we have not yet reached there. Other countries now are saying, come a given year, we are not going to allow any car using fossil fuels on the roads. So I think we will move there eventually, but we also have to survive in the meantime.
Can we sum it up for our viewers that you cannot have ESG without customs and trade, and then you cannot have customs and trade without ESG?
Yes.
Great. So there you have it. Let us now dive into our question answers, and I want us to quickly go to our panel speakers. We'll start with the lady, that is Shifra Sunday. And my question to you, Shifra, is that in today's world, we are seeing that companies are increasingly held responsible for their environmental, social, and governance activities and must communicate their ESG plans effectively. So how would you say that a company articulates its ESG story?
Thank you so much, Sandra, and thank you to the previous speakers for highlighting these key issues on ESG and customs. Surely the era that we are in, and it needs us to address some of these issues, and this cannot be a better time for us to sit back and wait for the environment to solve its own problems, to do to have everything go wrong for us to finally wake up. We need to create the awareness now. We need to ensure that even as at an individual level and both at a company level, we have a story that drives our ESG agenda. If we are going to embrace ESG as a company, are we just going to look up Google and see what is ESG and put it on our website? No. We need to have a compelling narrative and a story that drives what is our role in executing ESG to save the environment, to save the people, to save the communities that we live in. So to have a compelling narrative is not enough. You need to have a compelling narrative that brings into play what are the goals, what is it that we are focusing on. Me as my company, what is my key focus area? Am I looking at reducing greenhouse gas emissions? Am I looking at reducing forced labor? Am I looking at, if I'm a key player in business, am I looking at rejecting any goods from suppliers that are sending goods that have been manufactured using forced labor? So to have a compelling story is to ensure that you have all your plans and goals in place. Once you have the goals and plans in place, identify what are the key issues that we are going to focus on, because ESG is broad and each and every company operates in a different sector and an industry, and surely each sector will have an issue that's being affected with different matters. So pick out what applies to your company for your story to be compelling and heard. Once you've picked out the story and the key issues that you want to identify, look at who is getting affected. Who are the stakeholders that I can work with to ensure that my compelling story goes out there? Once you look at the stakeholders, what else do I do? You'll need to coordinate. You'll need to have partnerships in place to see that your story goes out there, because I believe one company cannot drive an agenda alone, but you can work with different stakeholders. For example, you can work with the government, you can work with the environmental authorities. If I have a big factory and I release a lot of carbon emissions what is it that I'm doing? I can work with NEMA probably, or any other environmental organizations, to set up like a place where we plant like a lot of trees to ensure that we gain some credits at least on a certain end, in as much as we are emitting a lot of carbon into the environment. We've also put in steps to plant trees, to maybe protect the environment, to ensure that the communities around us are safe. We have proper drainage systems. We do not have landfills that have an impact on the environment. So once you've partnered with people and you've had collaborations, what next? Like I said at the start, it's not just about having a story. What are the action plans that you have in place to ensure that that story is put into place? There is one thing opening a company website and saying, oh, we are socially responsible, we care about the environment, to do everything. But in practical scenarios, you visit these factories and they are the biggest contributors of landfills, they are the biggest contributors of emissions, and people around them are getting affected. For example, you look at where a factory is set up and you see that the people around are affected by a lot of pollution and everything. So it's not about having a story, but it's a story that's put into action and communicated very well to the different stakeholders in the different media channels that will make it have a lot more sense. So have the story, collaborate, partner, and ensure that the story is also put into action. And once you put it into action, gather feedback. What is it that we've done right? Has it worked? What is it that we've done? Is it going wrong? Or are we just saying things and putting, because sometimes we put into goals that we are not attainable, and then we say we are going to stop emission of carbon emissions, but you don't even have the skills, the technology, the right personnel, the people to implement it, and now that becomes a goal that you cannot achieve. So to have a compelling, to have a great story, have a compelling narrative that is put into action and is also very well communicated to the stakeholders that are affected. A good story will help companies attract investment. Investors are more focused in investing in companies that are socially responsible, that are working towards sustainability. So for you to have an investor come to you, have your compelling story that's well articulated with a good narrative and also put into action. It also helps businesses have a good reputation, have a good credibility, receive financing. So having a good story does not just stop about putting it out there in the public, but it also has a lot of benefits that I feel companies must embrace for them to tap onto those benefits. Yes.
A good story will attract investors. And it is very interesting how you say a lot of companies will actually put out a good story, but when you get on ground, they're doing the opposite. And I want us to speak directly again to the Ugandan audience. Would you say that most companies, because we really do have quite a number, are clearly stating their ESG goals and they're focused on building this narrative?
Thank you so much. When we look at a Ugandan perspective, speaking from Uganda, we've lived in Uganda, we've seen it. I can say we are still lagging behind in these ESG issues and having a compelling story. In fact, the scenario in Uganda is that companies have the story that's not backed with action. Because we look at having, for instance, the issue that Peter talked about of any cars below 2010 or maybe a certain period of years, you'll have to attract an environmental levy. But people are still bringing in the cars. So we have the plan to reduce the emissions, but we are still bringing in the cars, and the cars are more affordable than anyone buying a new car. So then another thing that you find is that our environment is really doing so bad. We have companies that have corporate social responsibility strategies of we clean up the environment, we do everything. But you realize that their corporate social responsibility and ESG strategies are only done at a particular period of time. Each company will say, in September, we shall clean up the environment. Yet the environment requires consistent action and cleaning. We are going to ensure that people in factories are not suffering, but you find that a company has a specific day. Every March, we are going to ensure that we go and interview factories and see if people are suffering. So you find that we are more focused on putting out a story and not actually having a consistent plan of action. So the lack of consistency is what's affecting us in Uganda.
And I think this is the point where if you're a company, an organization, or an individual, you sit back and actually question yourself, what story are you selling? Are you putting out a narrative that is false, or are you actually truly doing the needful within your environment? Very interesting conversation. Now that we get Shifra's perspective, would like to understand what are the key areas of focus for companies on ESG. We are probably here telling you, if you decide in June you're going to always clean the environment, and we are asking you to be consistent, at least to do it every other time. But what is your key focus for that? So this question goes to Edgar, and my concern is that we are seeing issues that were once seen as purely reputational or part of corporate social responsibility, like Shifra mentioned, becoming integral to sound corporate governance and strong financial performance. So what are the key areas of focus for companies when it comes to ESG?
Thank you, Sandra. Now, as Edgar, the other Edgar, introduced the subject, ESG is the single most unifying topic globally as it is, and because of that same reason, it definitely does affect each and every company, regardless of the sector that you're involved in. Now, from a survey that we carried out, I would say that the key areas of focus are summarized into 6 aspects. Now, the first is what is expected of us. And at this point in time, every single company, organization is asking themselves that question: what is expected of us? What is our responsibility as a company? What is our contribution as far as the ESG agenda is concerned? As we are carrying out the planning, as we're doing our budgeting in every single year or given period, how are we taking ESG into consideration? Looking at the 3 aspects of the environment, what is our contribution to the environment, or what is expected of us to, as far as the environment is concerned, what are we expected to do? Then when you look at the other stakeholders in terms of governance, what is expected with the board, from the board's perspective, what issues should we be discussing that are concerning ESG? When we're looking at it from the regulator's perspective, what do the regulators expect of us to ensure that we are not in breach and then thereafter have penalties being imposed on us? When you're looking at people, the employees that we have, the staff that we have, what is it that these staff are expected of us? And that is the same in line with the topic that Edgar again had highlighted globally. What responsibilities do we have in terms of the rights of this staff, the food, the environment under which the staff are carrying out their activities? What is it that we're doing? Then the second question that all companies are looking at is, where are we? So we now know that ESG is here, but how are we doing as a company? And the risks that are associated with ESG are supposed to be understood. Of course, it's important that we identify those risks in as far as the company is concerned. It's important that we quantify the potential risks that could come to us as a company. And then, most importantly, how are we as a company managing these risks to ensure that we're actually meeting expectations? Then the other question is, are we prepared? And are we prepared? For a lot of companies, now is a good time to take stock. What are we doing, and what more do we need to do? Are there some changes in policies that need to be put in place? Are there some changes in the way in which we do things that we need to take into consideration? If you look at the environment, the way in which we dispose of waste, should we be considering making some adjustments in the way that is being done? Then the 4th aspect is, how do we remain ahead of the competition? Ultimately, it's a business. And as much as it's a new requirement, it again presents a unique opportunity for companies that are going to jump onto this quick enough to be able to get ahead of the competition. So what can we do then as a company to get ahead of the business, to be perceived in a much better light than the other businesses that are in the same sector in which we operate? Then 5th is, what is at stake if we don't get it right? And as we indicated, ESG goes a long way, especially from the governance perspective. There is an expectation that you're going to comply with a certain set of rules that have been put in place. So are we subject to some penalties in the event that we are found not to be compliant with certain specific sections? Are we going to be attractive in terms of investment? Are we going to be attractive in terms of our personnel? And that's from the social perspective. Do people want to work with us? The perspective that the public has of us. Are we the kind of organization that people want to deal with? Do people want to partner with us? So again, that's the other evaluation of what happens if we don't get this right. Then lastly is, what opportunities does ESG present? And the opportunities that ESG presents are enormous, ranging from the environmental and social financing. There are specific institutions that are actually now coming in place to give out financing in terms of credit based on ESG and the level of compliance of a certain organization with ESG. So that, again, could give you as an organization the edge as far as financing is concerned, to the extent that you're found to be compliant with this set of ESG and the rules. The other perspective is sustainability. Looking at the world today, the perspective, the importance that is attached to ESG, are we as a business sustainable? Are we going to be able to continue in business? Do people want to work with us? Are we going to have a situation where our customers no longer want to buy our products, probably because of the negative PR that we have as far as ESG and compliance with ESG is concerned? And then labor and the workforce. Are we going to be able to attract the best workforce and labor and resources? Because a lot of staff, especially looking at the millennials, will attach a very high level of purpose to the sort of organization that they want to work with. And the extent that you're not perceived to be in line with the purpose of ESG, which is the single most important subject globally currently, then that probably means that the level at which you're able to attract the best kind of workforce that would get you ahead would be curtailed. So in a nutshell, Sandra, I'd say that those are some of the aspects that companies are looking at as far as ESG is concerned.
If I may stay with you, Edgar Mukasa, not the other one. In Uganda, we've had so many complaints about pay. So many young people have gone to social media. You know, there's a time I think I posed a question on Twitter and I said, translate your salary into US dollars. And the conversations under that tweet were not very favorable. A lot of people are saying, don't throw me into a depression. You're attacking the whole country. The table you're shaking is a huge one. I mean, when it comes to the pay in line with ESG, how important is it?
Absolutely. As I indicated again, when you're looking at it from the planning perspective, and even as we're doing the budgeting, and the pay definitely is one of those key factors that are taken into consideration by any employee as they choose where they want to work. So a lot of the organizations that want to remain ahead of the competition, who identify the fact that the organization can only thrive to the extent that they attract the best employees, then pay is definitely one of those key agenda items that are being looked at. And I can tell you for sure that in the last 6 months or so, we have gotten a number of companies coming to us to assist them with carrying out salary surveys. And that definitely is an indicator that people or the companies are trying to reflect as to how are they doing. Is there more that they need to do as far as pay is concerned, in line with the respective job descriptions of the employees that they have? So I think that it can only get better from here.
All right, I just want to once again stay with you because I know we may not get back to this point. You brought out a number of things of when you're looking at the key areas, you know, of focus for companies for ESG, you have to ask yourself, what is expected of me? What is my contribution towards ESG? In terms of employees, which we've just talked about, how do we stay in the business, sustainability? But again, a company out there may be asking, at what point do I start discussing ESG? At what point? At the very start? In the middle? At what point?
Our recommendation is from the very start, because again, ESG ought to be embedded in each and every aspect of the business. So from the onset, when you're looking at the business plan, every aspect that you're going to do when you open up shop that first day, ESG ought to have been taken into consideration. Aspects like, what sort of environment are we going to have our employees work in? Aspects like, if we're in manufacturing, how are we going to dispose of the waste? Aspects like governance, how are we going to ensure that the organization is well governed, that the leadership is a leadership that is fair and taking the public interests into consideration. So definitely should be from the start, every aspect of the business needs to be ESG having been embedded into it. Thank you.
So in other words, when you're setting objectives, your values as a company, and this I'm bringing it out because we may have viewers that are actually starting up a business and are wondering, how do I, survive, and how do I probably compete with the other existing companies, you have to embed it within your core values from the very start.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much, Edgar Mkasa. Now, I want you to pass the microphone to the lady right next to you, Lucy. We've had a great background of what ESG is, right away from Edgar, from Stephen, from Shifra, and now we want to understand from you, what are the gains from ESG and customs and trade compliance? So, for example, just to throw some light, if my company has an environmental friendly policy and encourages its employees to actually cater for the environment and actually pays them well, they're happy. And if I'm trading as well, I'm following all the guidelines. What are my gains for me in a country or in a world, not to put it to one specific area, that could have corruption tendencies? What are my gains, for example?
Thank you so much, Sandra. One of them is reduction in cost of running the business. And with this, we are looking at the certain things that you're going to do to be compliant with ESG that are going to assist you to reduce the cost of running a business. And one of them is lower energy consumption, or a lower consumption of water, or recycling of water. So you realize that as time goes on, the amount of money that you're going to spend on power, that you're going to spend on usage of water actually reduces. Then the other one is on reduction on things like taxes. For example, in our income tax law, there's a provision that exempts or that provides a certain benefit to organizations that actually employ PWDs. So you find that as you're complying with ESG, you're actually able to reduce the cost of running business. So when we bring it down to customs, when you decide to import, let's say, goods from a country that is nearer to you, in order to reduce the amount of fuel that's being used, you're able to spend less on transport. And in turn, you're able to actually spend less on the customs duties, because the transport would be included when computing the customs. Then the other one is attracting talent and attracting the best talent that there is. We are at a time whereby young talent that's actually very good is looking to work for an employee, rather to work for an employer who is involved in doing things that are above them, more of like a purpose. And for me, ESG is one of those things that is going to help you to do something that is above and beyond your purpose as a business, and you're able to attract that talent. The other bit is top line development, and this is in two ways. If you're concentrating on sourcing materials, buying goods from suppliers who are actually ESG compliant, you're able to buy sustainable products. And if you're providing sustainable products because you're compliant with ESG, you're able to attract customers who are actually interested in dealing with persons who are ESG compliant. The other bit is around funding. As it has already been stated, there is certain funding that's actually attached to ESG attributes. Do you have a certain ESG attributes in place? And that is when you're actually able to access that funding. The other one is on regulatory compliance. There are laws in place in how a company is supposed to be governed in Uganda. And if you're actually compliant with those laws or compliant with ESG in itself, you're actually compliant with the law, and you do not find yourself on the other side of the law. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. So to sum it up all, you have a lot to lose if you don't have ESG plans or goals within your organization, if you're not following customs and trades, if you're not compliant. There's so much you have to lose than to gain at all. However, just staying with you, Lucy, we cannot shy away from the fact that there are corruption tendencies almost everywhere. And while you're talking about water reduction, attracting the best talent, there's a company out there that is thinking, okay, I could do all this, but then there's the backdoor business that frustrates me. Even if I'm doing everything right, the other company that is doing none is doing better. How should a government an organization or company navigate that, for example?
Thank you so much, Sandra. It is a reality that these tendencies are in place, but we have also seen businesses that have been successful in Uganda by sticking to their anti-bribery, anti-corruption policies. We also know that there are suppliers, there are customers who are actually interested in dealing with businesses that do not deal with corruption, that do not have corruption tendencies. So much as those tendencies are there, but there are businesses in place, there is a place for a person who is compliant with anti-bribery, with anti-corruption tendencies. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Lucy. And that brings me to yet another interesting question, which falls into what Lucy were talking about, but it will be going to Charles Mwanguzi. And it's the wonder at the back of our minds. Does Uganda and East Africa at large have enough tools to drive the ESG customs agenda effectively? With all these things at the back of our minds and all our struggles and our good and our bad, do we have enough tools to drive this agenda?
Thank you, Sandra. And thank you to our viewers who are watching this or listening to it. By listening in, you are obviously contributing to the ESG agenda. And from a tools perspective, ESG is something which I cannot say it's new. It's something that its influence is just trying to increase. And from a Ugandan perspective, we are just trying to catch up with the rest of the world. And with that in mind, I can say that we have tools. As to whether they're enough is subjective. But the tools we have, I'll speak to a number of them, and then also speak to maybe some areas where maybe we can have more emphasis. So currently in Uganda, we have an e-tax platform where you log in and maybe file your returns, and those can be the customs returns, for example. We also have the automated systems for customs data, commonly referred to as ASCUDA. And this ASCUDA platform is where you log in, declare your goods that you're bringing into the country through the importation, and the goods are obviously processed and they're released. So we have that ASCUDA platform, and all that is speaking to the environment because it's all paperless and doesn't necessarily need you to do anything other than sit on your computer, have internet, and do your transaction. We also closely linked to that is the e-payments, because you find yourself, you're bringing commodities from around the world, and you may not have access maybe in some of the banks around, but you can access your bank here in Uganda through the e-platforms, transact, pay the payments. They are picked in 5 minutes. Usually they are picked by URA that confirmation has been received of your funds, and the goods are released and you proceed to trade. We also have something called the single customs territory. Now, the single customs territory is one where we have people who are bringing in commodities, but these commodities are being cleared at the point of entry. So take an example. The goods are due for Kampala, but we know that, I'll use the Mombasa route, for example. The first point of entry will be Mombasa. So as you bring in these goods, the single customs territory will allow you to clear them at that point in Mombasa, and it also allow you to make the necessary payments at that point in Mombasa, such that by the time the goods are coming in to Malaba, for example, they will not face that long duration of clearance. They would have already been cleared at the point of entry. So what does that do for ESG? You'll find that from a social perspective, it's trying to make sure that you're able to have customer satisfaction, because the goods will be brought in time and people will be consuming the product, and there will be less durations of waiting. From a governance perspective, I think you spoke about bribes, and usually when you're in a long queue at those borders, you try to cut the queue, and usually it's through the bribes. So it's cutting those types of things with bribes as well. So it's also a good thing to have. We have another tool which is called the electronic cargo tracking system. So this is a system, like you hear the word tracking, it's basically tracking your truck, your goods, your containers all the way. For example, I'll use the same example I used before, the one of the point of entry, clearing the goods to the single customs territory. So the quick question is, after you've cleared those goods, isn't it possible for those goods to be tampered with as they're coming through? And now that brings you to the electronic cargo tracking system that they have, whereby they're able to see how the container is being moved. There is a center where, in case they are tracking it and anything is being tampered with those containers, they can tell. And you'll see a rapid response unit following that track and ensuring that that doesn't happen. And from available ERA data, we've seen that previously, most of those importers who do daily routine importations, they've been complaining, or they were thankful of URA that previously they were incurring almost 3 billion Uganda shillings to track their containers to ensure safety and also to ensure that they're not tampered with. And you realize that that then translates into the social bit, whereby the cost of the goods is obviously being reduced, because now the goods will be cheaper. Some of the costs are falling off, like all those billions that are being used for tracking. And then you also have an element to do with the environment, because ultimately the people who were tracking these goods before were using vehicles, and as such there is less carbon emissions that are there in that moment, because you're using the technology available. We have a few levies that have been introduced. Some of them have been talked about. We have the infrastructure levy. This was previously introduced to bring in, if you're bringing in any dutiable items, and those items are from outside the East African community, they were attracting infrastructure levy. And this, I think, was around 1.5% of the customs value. But then, obviously, it is for the infrastructure. So assuming you are using a corridor of Malaba, it's good that if this infrastructure levy is being levied on you for using that corridor, then it should be used to develop that corridor from a social perspective, and I think that is the intention. And it was, I think, brought to make sure that the standard gauge railway is being constructed, and Kenya has seen that. Uganda is in the process of seeing to that, but it shows you where the government thought process is when it comes to the social aspects to do with trade. And we have the environmental levy. I think Peter touched on that previously. And the environmental levy is more or less focused on the motor vehicles. So they have a used vehicle database, which is obviously being used to compute the levy as the base. But ultimately, in case you bring in cars below 8 years, you don't suffer the environmental levy. But any car between 9 and 15 years is a car which will attract a levy between 20 to 50% of that value of the vehicle that URA has. And that is very important, because ultimately the environment is being protected. And that's why in Uganda now you can't import cars after 15 years or above 15 years. As such, there is no environmental levy for that. So the carbon emission levels should be able to be reduced. I think you asked a good question previously. You mentioned to Peter, why are they still charging? Because even if you charge, the environment is still being affected. I think to answer that as well is, the intention of the regime is both restrictive and at the same time to ensure that there is also the environment being protected. Restrictive in a way that you won't import so many cars because obviously the cost will be high, and as such you will try and make sure that you import one, or you use even the one you have in that situation, because the cost is so high. And then from an environmental perspective, obviously it is something that is important, because the less cars you have on the road in that nature, the better. Now, when you talked about something to do with governance, I think ESG is also, it goes hand in hand with governance. And I think from a tools perspective, that's where now we ask ourselves, from this customs regime that we have, URA data shows that Customs Department was able to, I think, contribute was able to meet its target by 103%. That is for the financial year 2021-2022. So they collected around 8.4 trillion just in the previous last year. So you wonder, in terms of governance, how are you using what we have collected to make sure that we are focusing more on the environment, on the social aspects, because you have to use your available resources to make sure that things are moving in the right direction. And obviously, from a governance perspective, it leads you to the question of how are we implementing this issue of environmental levies, because it is there to make sure that if you collect the levy, you correct as well the environment. So it shouldn't be about penalizing someone or restricting them as well. It should also be about correcting that, yes, people are bringing in the cars, but can we correct what they are going to do through the levies they've contributed? And I think there are ways you can do that as well. You talked about forced labor, and I think from a tools perspective, it's something we are not so, we don't have in Uganda. Yes, the Employment Act provides for you ensuring that you don't use forced labor, but then countries like the US have the US, Mexico, and Canada through their agreement recently signed, and also the EU Parliament that has passed regulations of recent to make sure that you're prohibiting import of goods that are coming into these jurisdictions, and those goods are being manufactured through forced labor. So I think we need to reach that level of those developed countries, ensuring that we are also more intentional and ensuring that we're able to demonstrate that if you're bringing in these commodities and we can tell, or we know that they're from these jurisdictions that use foreign or forced labor or even child labor, then they shouldn't be able to come into the country. So those are some of the tools and areas of improvement.
Thank you so much, Mark. Just to, in a second, are there any missing gaps within the tools that we have as Uganda and East Africa that you feel should be given priority?
Yeah, I think there's obviously room for improvement because when you look at the environmental levy, I think, like Peter said, ultimately we would want to move away from having them in those cars and then focus more on the new cars. And then we need to focus more as well on renewable energy and ensuring that we're using it through our processes that we have. For example, as URA or as the government, how are you using renewable energies in your requirement to comply with these laws? So there is need to set a very good example.
All right, thank you so much. Now, we all can agree that lately almost everyone who's doing business, or pretty much everyone, wants to use some bit of digital platform. And when we speak trade, is there any way, digitalization of trade, is there any way it can contribute to net zero emissions? I want to give this question to Mr. Stephen Ineget. Do you think if we decide, for example, to go digital in terms of trading, can we address some of the issues that have been pointed out or brought out by different panel speakers? The limiting gaps, the missing gaps.
Thank you, Sandra. That's a very important question. And the simplistic side is yes, if you just take the question the way it is. The reality is a bit different. How do you get to the yes? ESG, like we've said, is a very important aspect to each and every business. And here I'm talking about reporting. Digitalization comes in handy, not only in managing the carbon emissions, but also how do you report. Each organization, first of all, has got to understand the types of emissions. There are those that relate to the normal greenhouse gases. So, good. What about those associated with your productive activities? How then do you measure them? Then there are those that are associated with the buy side, the supply side, when you're buying, say, electricity for heating, for your ACs, and all of these things. It's coming from a third party, but you are part of it. Now, those are the three areas of carbon emissions that organizations need to know. Now, the challenge comes in terms of putting systems in place. One, with the clear performance indicators. What are our targets in each of these areas? We have even made it more complex that, yes, an organization can set its own targets. It can have systems to measure. But we also want somebody independent to come and review and give assurance to other stakeholders that indeed, when you said we want to get to net zero by this year, on a yearly basis, we shall be reducing by these percentage points by performing the following activities or initiatives, somebody should review and confirm that, yes, indeed, it is true. And then that report becomes reliable, trustworthy, and you can make a decision as an investor that this is a company I want to deal with. Now, when you look at trade, there is a massive supply chain. So many parties are involved. So digitalizing that is certainly a very, very big step in the right direction. But what comes with that is currently trade is largely paper-based. You know, if you're importing a car from Japan, they ship papers to you in Uganda. How can we get all of this digital? But yes, getting digital means you're having servers, which are big contributors to carbon emissions as well. So now with the cloud technology, you're saying, let us move these servers, cooling server rooms, powering them. These are massive carbon emitters. So you're saying, can we just move this out of buildings and take it to the cloud, where then you are almost immediately dropping it to zero by just that action. So that's very critical. So once we remove the paper that's currently dominant in the supply chain, deal with the challenges within the supply chain, then digitalization is a big and a must-have activity that will help us move to carbon zero. If you look at the survey that was done in the UK through the Chamber of Commerce, they actually said that efficiencies within digitalizing within the supply chain, they could save about 225 million. This is in terms of pounds. That's a lot of money. They're also looking at about 25 billion of savings within the SME trade group. So those are good numbers if we digitalize. So do we have the capacity? Do we have the money? Do we have the technology, the expertise needed for us to move to this level, especially, say, in Uganda? It's a journey. A lot is happening. We are seeing too many young children coming out of university, taking up jobs. They will facilitate companies in this journey.
But a lot still needs to be done.
A lot has to be done.
All right, thank you so much. Now, do allow us speak briefly about a supply chain. Now, if you've heard about supply chain, you probably know it is a connected system of organizations, activities, information, and resources designed to source, produce, and also move goods from its origin to a final destination. Now, Stephen did point that digitalization, while it may be good, there's still some limiting factors. Now, if we are talking about moving goods from one place to another, Esther Achieng, can supply chain transparency be achieved through ESG, the conversation that we're having today?
Okay, thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you to the panelists and to our viewers today. First of all, let me start by defining what is supply chain. Supply chain is a series of steps that are performed to ensure that goods and services are actually delivered to the customers. When supply chain was first introduced, it was more of looking at supply commodities and then deliver them to customers. But with ESG being a pertinent issue right now, it's very, very important for companies to look into how can we make the supply chain more sustainable and responsible. And that comes with change in the mindset of the people who come up with the supply chain. One of the important components of a supply chain is procurement. How do you procure the commodities that you're using to be able to deliver these services and goods to your customers? So in order for you to change the procurement, one important thing is change your supply chain design and incorporate elements of sustainability and responsibility to emit, so that you can remove any elements that you have, like a negative impact that you could have on the environment. For instance, if you are involved in the manufacture of furniture, one of your key resources that you're going to use is the wood, which is gotten from trees. So how sustainable is that whole process that you have from getting the trees from the forest and then delivering the furniture to the customers. So it's important to look at how are you sourcing these, who are your suppliers, what are their strategies that they're employing to ensure that actually when they cut down the trees, are they replacing the trees that they have cut down to ensure that you have sustainability and you're responsible. The other thing that you have to look at is what kind of labor are you using in your supply chain. As I said, supply chain looks at the entire steps involved to deliver the goods to the customers. So it starts from sourcing, the manufacturing, and then delivering the goods. So at the point at which you're manufacturing the goods, like for the labor that you have, are they efficiently being used? Is there no instances of forced labor that is being used to enable you deliver the goods to the customers? So some of the ways in which companies can use supply chain transparency through ESG is one, by getting all the employees involved in the process. All the employees should be educated of the need of the compliance with ESG so that they're aware and it becomes part and parcel of the culture of the organization so that they're all aware. Secondly, have a dedicated team that will help you review and ascertain whether you're still in compliance with ESG. And the third one is for the supply chain, redesign your supply chain model to ensure that actually the policies you have in your supply chain are in compliance with ESG. And very recently, for the past 5 years or so, like technology has become a very, very important part of any business operations. So use the technology that is available to enable you monitor your compliance with ESG and also to measure your performance against competitors in the market, because that can also influence the buying decision of the consumers you have, because some consumers will buy products from a company when they see that they're actually compliant with ESG.
So Esther, just to stay with you, still with the supply chain transparency, where do you think the problem usually comes from? What hinders ESG, or what hinders this transparent nature that we are talking of?
Okay. Thank you so much, Sandra, for that. So the problem that comes in from ESG is most times the companies will focus on their process. They may not look at the source. Where is all this material that I'm using coming from? How is the environment being impacted by this process? So it's very important for companies to do an evaluation of even their suppliers. How compliant are you with ESG? Yes, you're supplying me all these materials, you're supplying me the wood that I need to produce the furniture, but how are you compliant with ESG? So it's important for companies to look even back end from the sourcing of the materials that they're using. So look through the entire valuation from the source to even the people you're supplying the commodities to.
Maybe, Esther, let's just simplify it and say, for example, if I am starting up a factory and I'm probably buying iron sheets, how do I start questioning your ESG values? At what point?
Thank you so much for that question. So it's at what point? First of all, before you get a customer on board, do an evaluation of the customers that you're going to use. If the supplier you're going to use is exploiting labor to produce those iron sheets to sell to you, it's going to create a reputational damage on yourself. People might say that this particular supplier is purchasing these iron sheets from someone who is not respecting human rights. So it would actually reduce on your sales. So at the point of contracting the suppliers, do an evaluation of them at that point, then also throughout the entire process of your supply chain until when the goods reach the final consumer.
Thank you so much, Esther. You've actually responded exactly how I hoped you would, because on the international scene, we've seen a number of people boycotting, especially the clothing brands, because of the things they're doing in terms of how they mistreat children or the forced labor behind it. And it makes a lot of sense, because sooner or later, what is done at the back usually comes to the front. So I want to once again stay with you, because this is very important, and I believe our viewers will love to know more about this. In Uganda alone, do you think we have the urgency to actually do background checks?
Thank you so
Do
much.
we?
Do we have the urgency? I would say yes and no. It depends on the kind of companies. What we have seen, most times the companies would look at how fast will I get this, like how fast will I get these materials for me to produce, and they will not go to the back end. So most companies, because of the need, the urgent need from their suppliers, they may not go the extra mile to get it. But for a company that is compliant and knows that they should actually do that check. But in Uganda, it's something that has not yet been embraced.
It is a bit
really
sketchy.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, everyone should know that sooner or later it affects you, whether in the short term or in the long term.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Esther. As we almost come to the end of our conversation this morning, I would like to pass the mantle back to Edgar Isingoma, and I would like you to share with us your knowledge on the ESG risks and opportunities in the global supply chain.
Indeed, ESG presents huge opportunities, but also it comes with risks. Maybe let me start on the aspects of the risks that ESG has presented, and especially in terms of our developing countries. Developing countries, we are talking about just transition. How do we ensure that transitioning to ESG is justified and it does not compromise the current economic and livelihood of our people without actually compromising everything else? So it must be justified. The developed countries are already at a faster pace. When you look at energy transition, right now, when we are in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, we are all developing countries, we are saying, you are telling us to move from that energy to go into renewable energy or clean energy. But when you look at it in terms of Africa, it's not justified. For us, we are underdeveloped. Our people will actually die if we switched off the coal mines, if we went on oil and gas and we are not able to touch the oil and gas in Western Uganda. We are heavily indebted on account of natural resources we are likely to exploit. So there is a risk if we tried right now to start moving there. But there is a balance that has to be achieved as we balance that risk. That is at a global economy level in terms of our countries. But also, when you look at it in terms of our own organizations, you cannot be drastic in terms of implementing this aspect of ESG. For example, Stephen has been talking about the balance, the need to balance when these cars are being imported and when should we stop importing them and all that. Development has to continue going on. If you took a drastic measure, you'll find yourself not able to be in the short term to meet your obligations and be able to proceed and be able to meet your objectives as an organization. Not even as an organization, but even as a country, you can have serious challenges. The other risk we are seeing in ESG is the lack of data, the metrics to be able to use to compare between companies and say, when I say I'm reporting these emissions, when I'm saying that my environmental issues or the equity issues are at this level, it means that I can be able to try as much as possible and compare with company A, company B, and company C, and be able to say that actually these aspects are actually comparable. It's a huge risk. And globally, the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board is coming up with standards to be able to use for comparability, such that people are not exploiting it and people are not reporting, everybody's reporting on their own. Actually, currently, metrics is the big challenge we have under ESG, because there's no standards which are approved globally to be able to drive us. But in the future, it's going to be able to help to happen as quickly as possible. The other risk which we are seeing is misinterpretation, lack of different meanings and perspective to what even ESG is, to what S means, to what the E means, what the G means. And many people think ESG is social responsibility. Instead of saying it's the way we do our business, how we run our business, how our life is lived in everyday perspective. That is ESG. So that is a risk also, because when enforcers are coming in, they'll be looking at different perspectives. The opportunities are huge, as we've already talked about it. It is in accessing finance. You can be able to access finance at lower cost. In terms of supply chain, the opportunity in ESG is because we are interlinked as the world, and we are sourcing from different countries, and many countries have reached a level where ESG is being enforced. There is a huge advantages in getting commodities which are ESG compliant anywhere in the world, because the global supply chain has already enforced all these mechanisms, and therefore you get good quality products, safer products. Products are compliant because you are getting from certain countries. You know how we talk about, this commodity is in such a country, I can trust it. That is the advantage of enforcing ESG under the global customs and trade, because you know you can trust whatever is coming from that country, you can rely. But also you know there are certain countries, the risks which are there. You know, if it is coming from a certain country, I have to open my eyes wider and check actually if it is compliant and all that. So if we don't have enforcement to check on such countries, we are just making sure that things are coming in, ESG may not come at an advantage. But if countries are compliant and World Trade Organization is doing its job, then ESG has a huge advantage in terms of bringing commodities that are safer, those commodities which we can be able to consume and be able to sleep, and at lower cost, and even making the world sustainable.
Now, staying with you, but also looking at the concept of sustainability, because I think we've talked a lot about it. How would you say that improving trade can actually become a force for sustainable development in the global supply chain?
How definitely. When trade is improving globally and the rules of the game by World Trade Organization are all being followed by all countries, it means that the standards of measurement, the standards of goods, the standards of trade are all similar throughout the world, and therefore, whatever is being consumed in a given territory, maybe US or the Europe, is the same standard which is going to be consumed in countries like growing countries like Africa. And it means that the standards which are at higher level in given countries are the same standards that we shall be able to follow in our own respective developing countries. It makes it easier for us even to develop faster, because we are adopting standards which have already been met elsewhere, which have been tested and tried, and makes us be on the better path of development. You have heard that for us in the developing countries now, we can be able to adopt better technology. We don't have to go through the whole process of developing prototypes and all that. The people in Europe and America have gone through that. For us now, we'll start at a higher pace, at a faster pace, because we are learning from the past and be able to adopt as quickly as possible and make things happen faster. So development will be faster and all that.
Thank you so much. Now, we cannot talk trade, talk sustainability, talk ESG without having imports and exports at the back of our minds. And I want us to move the microphone to Peter Chambade. And our conversation is taking the direction of where we want to understand how corporate ESG performance has the capacity to improve export intensity. Do you believe corporate ESG has the capacity to improve export intensity?
Thank you, Sandra. The answer is yes.
Why is it coming from far?
I fully believe that corporate entities that have embraced ESG, then their export intensity has become better. So the question is, what is export intensity, first of all? That is the ratio of export sales to total sales. So which means they have been able to export more of their products because of good ESG practices. And why is that so? As the other panelists have said, if a company or an entity embraces ESG, that means from an environmental perspective, they are doing things which are environmentally friendly, they are socially responsible, and they are governed well, then they are seen to be less risky, they are seen to be more reputable. Then, when you are dealing with them, people believe that their businesses are sustainable and you can do long-term business with them. And even when there are uncertainties like COVID, then they are able to handle them better because they are well governed, they are socially responsible. That, for example, when you talk of socially responsible, the employees that they have believe in them, they are inclusive, they are equitable. You asked about pay. Entities that are really embracing ESG, they are paying their people well. So they are happy.
Because they know the importance.
The importance.
Yes.
So the people they use in their business are happy. And then the stakeholders are also happy to deal with them, from the regulators to even investors. So that means such entities can attract cheaper financing. These days we have green financing, and socially responsible entities are getting this cheaper financing. And with cheaper financing, then that means they have the ability to improve their processes, to be innovative, and then improve their exports. One of the other key things ESG brings in is innovation. And if you look at entities that have embraced ESG from way back, like the Nikes of this world, I was reading one of their reports and they are saying an entity which does not embrace sustainability at the core of its business, then such an entity will not grow. And that was way back. That was a report they published way back in 2011. And one of the key aspects, like Nike, we're talking about, in order to make sure that you embrace ESG fully, then you have also to put innovation at the core of your business. So that if I'm making a shoe, the materials I'm using, how environmentally friendly are they? How recyclable are they? Where I'm making this shoe from, are they embracing ESG? There was a survey that was done, a study was done in China, because China is very export-oriented. And out of that study, it was actually found that the entities that had embraced ESG their exports were much better than those that had not. Because the suppliers were willing to supply to them. So they have better supply chain, they have better credit terms. The customers were willing to buy from them. And as such, they have actually grown and increased their sales from an export perspective. So yes, ESG will lead to better exports. So
because
even as Uganda, that is something that we need to focus on, because we want to improve our level of exports.
Would you say as a country currently we are exporting to our capacity?
No.
We have more to export, but we are not exporting it. Would you put it that way?
In my view, yes, we have a lot of export potential. However, we have not yet fully utilized that potential.
Would you tie that to ESG as well? Would you say we are not, exporting to our full potential because somewhere along the way we haven't met all our ESG goals?
There are certain aspects which you could tie to ESG. Because, for example, there are aspects to do with governance that if we had done better, then we would be able to actually export more.
True.
Okay? So there are also social aspects which could have improved our productivity and which then would have led to better exports. So I would say the potential we have is big, and there's a lot of room as a country that we need to do. And even from a socially responsible perspective, we find that we export mainly raw materials. Why aren't we innovative enough? Because if we are to be very socially responsible, we would be able to add value to what we have.
For example, to our cocoa
Yes.
and the like.
And then manage even the environment better, because if we start adding value, we may not exploit the environment the way we are exploiting it, but at the same time, get higher value for the benefit of everyone.
There's someone who actually posted on Twitter recently. I think they were on the... I usually go to Twitter a lot to get information and the thoughts of people, really. And I noticed that this person was on the Uganda Airlines, and the yogurt that was served was made from Kenya. And the conversation there was, this is our own. Why are we not marketing our own? This is our airline. Why are we not marketing our own yogurt? We have quite a number of brands here. And I think that is just an example of the so many scenarios that we have in the country. And what would you say in regards to that, just briefly?
Just briefly to that, I also experienced something similar. One time I was sitting on, that time it was Air Uganda, Air Uganda, back. And I was sitting with a businessman, and they served us a product. Actually, it was still yogurt, which was from another country. And the question this businessman asked the waitress, don't we have good products here in this country that can be served on this plane? This is Air Uganda. Actually, the businessman told the lady, when you start serving our products, then I'll start taking this. So, which in my view was a very big message to us, is yes, how are we also promoting that as us? Because first and foremost, we must promote our own. And that is the way, one, it will grow them and improve its quality.
Don't you think that actually ties to what Shufra was saying of how you sell your story? Because then that simply means as a country we are not selling our story very well, and it ties back to governance, which is also in the ESG. Does that sort of,
Sandra, I agree. So that means even us as people, there's a lot more we have to do. And when it comes to selling our story, for example, when it comes to tourism, and you look at the potential we have and the way we sell it, and you compare to other places you visit, you find they are selling something which is nowhere close to what you have. But because of the way they have sold it, everyone is going there. But you have something 1,000 times better, but no one is actually going there. So, true, we need to sell our story. And from the ESG perspective, without greenwashing, it's important that we sell our story, what we are doing from an ESG perspective, the way it is, and that's where now the reporting part comes in. So every entity should be aware that they need to devise and strategize on how to report their ESG story.
All right, I hope they'll get a chance to watch this and pick out some of these points that they can incorporate in some of the Ugandan companies. So many questions, yet so little time, but I don't want to go without asking Mark this question. At what point do you think ESG issues actually come in the global supply chain? Mark Tusime, this is your question.
Thank you, Sandra. And I think for us to be able to tackle that question, we have to assess at what point will it have the maximum impact. You see, there's so much about ESG, there's so much about the environment. We've had so many laws that are supposed to protect the environment. We have a lot of laws and organizations that have been set up to protect the people, and so much has been spoken about boards and corporate governance. But where do we maximize impact? When it comes to supply chains, you have situations where sellers want to be paid cash. Buyers want to pay when they have received their goods. So for a lot of customs and trade and its supply chain, one of the most critical aspects is trade financing. So, do we have mechanisms in place that reward entities that have a good ESG agenda with better trade financing? In that way, their supply chains will be enabled.
And better supported.
And better supported. And that again will tie back to our revenue authorities. At the gate that Steve was talking about, where they're supposed to run the checklist, are there incentives to encourage the players in this supply chain to comply with this ESG agenda? We know there are some incentives like the green lane for those who are compliant to bring in their goods very easily. We know that there are incentives like the authorized economic operator, which are supposed to facilitate ease of movement of goods through different jurisdictions. But are they sufficient, and are their benefits well articulated so that all the different players in the global supply chain are able to tap into those benefits and improve their businesses overall? You know, you talk about the conditions of workers. Goods globally are moved using trucks, trains, ships. Do we know the condition of the people who move those goods? Are they being supported to have a dignified life? You know, when you're interfacing with the different tax authorities at the different points, are you treated fairly with dignity as a human being? Are your human rights looked after? When you're choosing to move those goods, the kind of vessels that you're using to move those goods, are they friendly to the environment, or are you still burning fossil fuels in an era where you can use wind energy, you know, to try and conserve certain aspects of the environment? And then again, also when you look at governance aspects, there are companies that facilitate movement of these illicit goods. For East Africa, for example, there are restrictions on the type of goods you're supposed to bring in. But how do those goods get here? They get here through a certain streamlined process that enables it to happen. So can we challenge these processes? Can we have tax authorities working with other stakeholders who have key points where they can challenge the status quo, which will allow us to streamline the global supply chain? It's only in that way, and in encouraging organizations to report their ESG agenda and what they are doing, especially companies in transport and logistics, and the buyers and sellers or the users of these global supply chains, that will have appreciation of the impact ESG can have on the global supply chain. Thank you, Sandra.
All right, thank you so much, Mark Tusime, for that. And I think your conversation was tying into what Esther Cheng was saying. It's very important for even the end user to understand the implications of taking on a product that does not respect ESG, ideas. So thank you so much to our panel speakers. Fortunately or unfortunately, we've come to the very end of this panel conversation. I know it is one that we could carry on, but hopefully KPMG can go to social media platforms and expound more on some of these things that I believe all of us need to understand. But do allow me invite the one that started to also come and end it. Mr. Edgar Singoma. We've had such a wonderful conversation here on ESG, supply chain, customs and trade. As we sign out today, really, what should be our key takeaways?
Thank you so much, Sandra. And before I talk about the key takeaways, I would want to also to thank you, really indeed, for facilitating this discussion, which, in my perspective, it has brought a lot to light, and allow me also thank the panelists who really have done a lot. And to me, when you look at ESG and the customs and trade, the two are interlinked. Definitely the two are interlinked, and the ESG in a way where globally it is being put in place, it is facilitating trade as much and as possible. And definitely it can be a way as much as possible to promote trade, to promote development. Even in developing countries, it is a key takeaway for us to embrace ESG. We can be able to promote our own exports. We can be able to promote our own development if we are able to comply with ESG. And ESG definitely is a strategic driver of business. It's not an operation matter. It has to be the way we do business, the way we live our life, the way we communicate, the way we do everything every day. So we need to change our perspective in terms of what ESG is and what value it can drive in our organizations, in our country, and in the world. The earlier we change that perspective of knowing that it is a strategic driver of value in the value chains, in the supply chains, the faster development is going to happen, and we are able to address the challenges which we are seeing in the world of global warming, of floods, of earthquakes. And then when earthquakes happen, people are killed in tens of thousands of people because these were not compliant in terms of regulations, of environmental, of social, and governance, because that is also ESG. People are dying because of lack of that. We need consistency of action to address all the aspects of ESG, all aspects of customs and trade. It cannot keep the normal talk. The fortunate thing is the world is moving very fast, and we have as much as possible to adopt, even as where we sit in our country. As we have said, ESG has huge advantages. If organizations can be able to make it a strategic driver of their business, their reputation will improve, their top line will improve, their profitability will improve. They can attract access finance at lower cost, they can get the best labor because of their purpose, because of they do their business and all that. As we go to implement ESG, you can't implement it while putting aside innovation. Innovation is so critical in terms of addressing the issues that face us in the world today. So we must be innovative in a way we procure, in a way we produce matters of circular economy. We can reuse, we can be able to transform it into something else. All those aspects are central in terms of our ESG and in terms of our sustainability. And to me, as we end, we need to sell our country better. There's a lot we have as a country called Uganda. And I can tell you, when I was in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh, I saw Rwanda selling their story in terms of the environment, in terms of eco-friendly. The focus they had there, they don't even have 10% of what we have in Uganda. You see people coming to talk about gorillas in Rwanda, yet most of them are actually in Gahinga in Uganda. We have many national parks. The big fives all are in our national parks, but Kenya sells a better story about all that. To me, we all need to rise up as organizations, as individuals, and as government to sell our story and promote our investments. Then customs and trade and ESG will lead to economic development of our country. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Edgar Singoma. You know, they say before, as you wait for others to clap for you, please clap for yourself. So ladies and gentlemen, do join me in clapping for ourselves for having made it for this panel conversation and for coming to the end of it. And there's been so many takeaways from this conversation. If you can just drop a comment whenever, wherever you see this conversation, just drop in your questions. And I believe KPMG will be right there to ensure that those concerns, the questions are responded to. However, from me, I want us to conclude this conversation with a quote from Joe Biden. This is the President of the United States. And he says that, "Don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget, and I will tell you what you value." So is it matters of environment, matters of governance, matters to do with social issues? The ball is in your hands. How you choose to tell your story is what will attract the right investors for you. For KPMG, they've done their part. Now the part is now yours. Remember, as much as you may shy away from some of the effects of the environment, they spare no one. If the sun comes, it will come to all of us. If the rain comes, it will come to all of us. If the floods come, the earthquakes, they won't know you're a landlord. They'll come for you. So the ball is in your hands to tell a better story and to create a better reality for everyone that concerns you. Thank you so much for having joined us for this panel conversation. It's been an honor, and I've been your host, Sandra Twinovideo.